In 2023, deep in the bowels of Pixar Animation Studios, a director named Adrian Molina was showing test footage of his passion project to colleagues, but there was a scene that had everyone talking. An 11-year-old boy performing what the crew called a trashin' show. That's fashion, but with garbage. For a hermit crab on a beach. The kid wore a pink tank top he'd made from ocean debris. His bedroom walls, we'd later learn, were covered with pictures suggesting he had crushes on other boys. This was Alio, Pixar's next big bet, or rather, this was going to be Alio, before something happened that nobody at Pixar saw coming. Not a single person wanted to pay money to see it. I mean that literally. When they tested the film in Arizona, audiences said they enjoyed it, gave positive feedback, filled out their little cards saying nice things, but when researchers asked the million-dollar question, would you pay to see this in theaters? Not one hand went up. Not one. Now, you'd think this would trigger some soul searching at Pixar, maybe a little reflection on whether spending $200 million to animate one director's personal coming of age story was the best use of shareholder money. Maybe even a gentle consideration that most American families don't necessarily want to spend their Saturday afternoon helping a stranger work through his childhood identity issues, but you'd be wrong because what happened next reveals something that explains why your favorite franchises keep dying, why studios keep losing money, and why every marketing campaign is basically you being scolded by your least favorite teacher. When Elio finally crashed and burned at the box office, pulling in the lowest opening weekend in Pixar history, the studio obviously didn't apologize for wasting everyone's time. They didn't even think they made a bad movie. What they did do was hop on Instagram with a message that perfectly explains Hollywood's relationship with its audience. Stop complaining that Disney doesn't make original stories if you don't show up.
Stop complaining that Disney doesn't make original stories if you don't show up to movie theaters and support them in the first place. Who, who said that? Oh my gosh. I thought I was the only one in my car.
A multi-billion-dollar corporation just failed spectacularly at the most basic requirement of their business, making something people want to watch, was to blame you for not appreciating their genius. Elio wasn't supposed to be a disaster. According to the Hollywood Reporter's investigation, what audiences eventually saw wasn't even the movie Molina wanted to make. After those catastrophic test screenings, Pixar executives panicked. They brought in new directors, they stripped away all the quote-unquote queer themes, the environmental activism, the personal touches that made it specifically Molina's story. And what they ended up with was somehow worse than a bad personal story. It was no story at all, a generic, soulless husk that satisfied literally nobody. Not the progressive audiences who wanted the original themes, not the general audiences looking for entertainment, not even the executives who ordered the changes. But even after all these, people will tell you what happened to Elio was an accident or an anomaly, but it's the perfect microcosm of a disease that's eating Hollywood from the inside out. There's this thing that happens when creative industries get too insular, too comfortable, maybe even too convinced of their own righteousness. They stop seeing audiences as customers to be served and start seeing them as students to be educated, or worse, as problems to be solved.
Yeah, Star Wars always had the vibe of being in the most whitest elite space. Like, this franchise is so white that it's like a black person existing in that was something.
Everyone has a favorite Pixar movie. Maybe it's Finding Nemo, where a nervous father learns to let his son grow up. Maybe it's The Incredibles, where a family of superheroes navigates suburban life while saving the world. Or Up, where an old man discovers that adventure isn't about the destination, but who you travel with. What made these movies work was never their demographic representation or their political messaging. It was that they took specific situations, a clownfish losing his son, superheroes in hiding, an elderly widower with balloons, and used them to explore feelings everyone has experienced: fear, love, loss, hope. The magic trick was making you forget you were watching fish or superheroes or talking dogs. You were watching yourself. Pixar forgot how to perform that trick a long time ago. They stopped using specific stories to illuminate universal truths and started making specific stories for specific audiences about specific issues. And when those hyper-targeted films failed to connect with general audiences, they had a choice: admit they'd lost touch or blame the audience for not being specific enough. Guess which one they chose. This isn't really just a Pixar problem, it's actually become the industry standard. In 2019, Elizabeth Banks made a Charlie's Angels reboot that nobody asked for, marketed it as a feminist statement, and then, before it even hit theaters, started pre-blaming men for its inevitable failure. She literally told media outlets that if her movie bombed, it would reinforce a stereotype in Hollywood that men don't go see women do action movies. Viola Davis did almost exactly the same thing with The Woman King, but with the added bonus of making it about race.
If you don't come see it, then you're sending a message that black women cannot lead the box office globally, that you are supporting that narrative.
There's obviously something beautifully cynical about this strategy. They were essentially buying insurance against criticism. If the movie succeeds, they'd be called visionaries. If it fails, they would be victims. Either way, they win. The only people who lose are the audiences being blamed for not showing up to movies that were literally designed to exclude them. Charlie's Angels opens. Both men and women stay home. Banks has two options: admit she made a forgettable film or double down on the sexism narrative. She doubles down. Because, of course, she does. But it took a lot for Banks to ignore Wonder Woman that made $822 million just 2 years earlier. Even Captain Marvel crossed $1 billion, but it was basically on the back of Endgame hype. Atomic Blonde also found its audience. Turns out, and I know this is shocking, people will watch women kick ass. They just won't watch boring women kick ass boringly in a boring movie that is boring. The distinction is important, but Hollywood just cannot see it. Paul Feig and the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot is the platonic ideal of how to destroy a franchise while claiming moral superiority. Feig took a comedy classic that worked because of the chemistry between its leads and their deadpan delivery of weird situations, and turned it into an improv-heavy SNL sketch stretched to 2 hours. When audiences rejected this, when even fans who desperately wanted to like it couldn't pretend it was good, Feig, like Banks, had a choice. He could have said, you know what? We missed the mark. We didn't understand what made the original special. But of course, he blamed misogyny, and then, and this is where it gets really special, he blamed the 2016 political climate. Like Trump voters were organizing sophisticated campaigns against a movie about women fighting ghosts. Like the problem wasn't the movie itself, but the moral failings of anyone who didn't enjoy it. This is what I started to call the Ghostbusters equation. Take a beloved property plus identity politics, divide by quality, multiply by audience blame, and you get a box office bomb that everyone pretends was actually a moral victory. The equation works every time because it plays an important psychological role for Hollywood execs. It lets them maintain their worldview that they're creating important progressive art while avoiding the reality that they're actually creating expensive garbage that nobody wants to watch. Netflix kind of perfected this formula by turning it into an algorithm. They don't even need to wait for the audience to reject a movie. They built the blame directly into their content strategy. Dear White People was where this strategy began. The title itself is an accusation. Before you've even pressed play, you're being told you're a part of the problem. Q-Force created an animated series so stereotypical that even progressive audiences cringed. The pattern is always the same. Create content designed to provoke people, act shocked when it provokes people, then blame the people you provoked for not being evolved enough to appreciate being provoked. When Netflix releases something genuinely good that happens to have quote-unquote diverse characters, audiences show up in massive numbers. There are usually no complaints, no boycotts, no toxic fandoms or review bombing on Rotten Tomatoes. It's almost like audiences care more about quality than demographics, you know? Like people will watch anything that's actually good regardless of who's in it or what it's about. But simply acknowledging this would break the entire victimhood apparatus that Hollywood has constructed to avoid accountability. If audiences aren't actually bigoted, if they're just discerning consumers who know garbage when they see it, then Hollywood would have to admit they're making garbage. And that cannot be allowed to happen.
The Star Wars fan base really seems to be the most kind of toxic at the moment. I'm probably being very controversial to say that.
The Star Wars fan-blaming reached such ridiculous heights that it deserves its own psychological diagnosis. Solo bombed in 2018 because exactly two people wanted a Han Solo origin story. The film was unnecessary, poorly timed, and aggressively mediocre. But Ron Howard, the director, blamed toxic fans. It's the same trend with the Obi-Wan show, Rey as a character, and almost everything Disney made since they bought Lucasfilm. Star Wars fans are among the most disrespected and vilified in history. The people who kept the franchise alive for decades through the wilderness years bought every toy, book, and lunchbox, passed their love down through generations like a holy scripture. These people were somehow the villains for not supporting a movie they never asked for about a character whose mystery was part of his appeal. These are the same fans who made The Force Awakens over $2 billion, despite it being essentially a remake of A New Hope. The same fans who sat through the prequels multiple times despite Jar Jar Binks. The same fans who've spent literally billions on merchandise, theme park tickets, and Disney Plus subscriptions. But it didn't reject Solo because the movie was dull and pointless. It was because they're toxic. Howard suggested coordinated trolling campaigns and review manipulation caused the failure, because apparently millions of Star Wars fans organized a conspiracy to destroy a movie about their favorite character. For fun, I guess. The truth is simpler and more damaging to Hollywood egos. Even Star Wars fans have standards. Even they have limits. Even they won't blindly consume anything with the logo slapped on it. Disney turned fan blaming into corporate policy. The Marvels became the lowest grossing MCU film in history, pulling in numbers that would have been embarrassing for a mid-budget thriller. Anonymous Disney executives gave quotes to industry trades that deserve to be framed in a museum of corporate delusion. According to Puck News, these executives claimed that audiences who said the movie was bad were actually using code words to hide their sexism. The theory goes like this: millions of people are so committed to concealing their misogyny that they've coordinated an elaborate cover story about poor storytelling, bad CGI, and incoherent plots. The mental gymnastics needed to reach this conclusion is pretty wild. It's easier for Disney to believe in a massive, coordinated conspiracy of secret sexists than to admit they made a bad movie. But Marvel already proved audiences will show up for female superheroes. So what changed? Well, The Marvels was a rushed, incoherent mess that needed homework, watching multiple Disney Plus shows to understand the plot. And most importantly, it looked cheap. But sure, the problem was definitely sexism.
You know, we had Lando Calrissian and had Samuel L. Jackson. It's like telling me how many cookie chips are on the cookie dough. I'm like, bro, it's just they just scattered that in there, bro.
Hollywood has a representation trap. Here's how it works. Studios make creative decisions based primarily on demographic checkboxes rather than story logic. When these decisions lead to bad storytelling, because of course they do, any criticism gets deflected as bigotry against whatever demographic was being represented. It's pretty brilliant. It makes bad movies criticism proof. Don't like the new Little Mermaid? You're racist even though your actual complaint is that it's a soulless cash grab that adds nothing to the original. Think She-Hulk spent more time lecturing viewers than entertaining them. You're sexist even though you loved Jessica Jones. Or believe Lightyear was completely unnecessary? Well, you're homophobic. The trap works because it changes the conversation from "is this good" to "are you a good person?" And once that shift happens, actual criticism becomes impossible. You stop discussing art and you start performing a morality play where the only acceptable response is enthusiastic approval. And that's exactly what's happening now, because they think audiences have become more bigoted. They haven't. They become more suspicious. When they see some identity markers in promotional materials, they've learned to expect lectures instead of entertainment. This reaction is defensive, yeah, but it was never about opposing diversity. It's just people doing what they do best, recognizing patterns. People have been burned way too many times by movies that prioritize messaging over storytelling and checkbox filling over character development. Velma actually made it past the first season. HBO's attempt to reimagine Scooby-Doo for modern audiences. They took good characters and turned them into bitter, angry activists who spent more time delivering political commentary than solving mysteries. The show was so universally despised that it achieved something remarkable. It unified the internet in hatred. Every demographic, every political class, every corner of social media agreed. This show was garbage. The media's response, as usual, was pretty predictable. They blamed toxic masculinity, racism, and of course, homophobia, because the only reason anyone could dislike a show that turned childhood nostalgia into a graduate seminar on intersectionality is bigotry. There's something specifically Californian about this whole disaster that needs to be understood. Los Angeles is ideologically hermetically sealed. These are people who live in a bubble where everyone agrees on everything important. They all vote the same way, read the same think pieces, repeat the same talking points at the same parties in the same hills. They've never had a meaningful conversation with someone who disagrees with them about anything. In their world, of course, people want to explore themes of gender fluidity through animation. Of course, families are crying out for movies about microaggressions and systemic oppression or something. Of course, the biggest problem facing America is that they don't have enough films about wokeness. When Pixar executives sat in that room and approved Melina's autobiographical therapy session, everyone probably thought it was brilliant. Revolutionary, even. They probably gave themselves awards for their bravery before a single frame was animated. The idea that a family in, say, Ohio might have different priorities, like, paying for groceries that cost 40% more than they did 5 years ago, simply doesn't compute. The possibility that parents might not want to pay premium prices to have California values transmitted to their children isn't just wrong to them, it's completely incomprehensible. This is how you get James Mangold wondering aloud what would make Indiana Jones fans happy, quote, other than starting over again with a new guy. Like the answer wasn't obvious. Maybe don't make a movie about Indiana Jones being old, sad, and replaced by a younger woman who's better at everything. Maybe people watch Indiana Jones movies for adventure and fun, not meditations on mortality and masculine obsolescence. But in Mangold's social circle, deconstructing beloved heroes is sophisticated. The idea that audiences might want heroes who are actually heroic, that's for the rubes in flyover country who don't understand art.
With us playing the best friend, but once we touch their heroes, once we lead, once we trailblaze, it's like, oh my God, it's just a bit too much.
Hollywood is built on gaslighting. They tell you that your rejection of their content is actually about your moral failings. Commercial failure is actually audience failure. Wanting entertainment instead of education makes you a bad person. Like I said, gaslighting. But on an industrial scale, Billy Eichner made a romantic comedy called Bros that was marketed exclusively to certain demographics in major metropolitan areas. When it bombed, shocking absolutely no one with a functioning brain, he tweeted that straight people, especially in certain parts of the country, just didn't show up. Oh yeah, Billy, people in rural Kansas didn't rush out to see your movie about hookup culture in New York. It's just basic market dynamics, not homophobia. It's like being surprised that vegans didn't attend the Texas Barbecue Championship, but Eichner couldn't just accept that he'd made a niche film for a niche audience. He had to make it a moral failing of everyone who didn't buy a ticket. Because in modern Hollywood, commercial failure is always about the customer's character, not the quality of the product. They're running out of money to keep playing this game. And shareholders don't care about your politics. They care about returns. This is why the Elio situation is so important here. According to the Hollywood Reporter's sources, the film didn't just cost the reported $150 million. Insiders estimate it was well over $200 million after all the reshoots and reworks. That's $250 million lit on fire because nobody at Pixar had the courage to tell Adrian Molina that his personal therapy session wasn't universal entertainment. See, most people go to movies to be entertained. This isn't as obvious to the execs as you might think. They don't need you to remind them about their daily struggles. They want to escape them. They want to see heroes triumph, not watch them get deconstructed. They want to feel wonder and joy, not sit through lectures about their moral failings. This isn't complicated. It's not really mysterious. It's not even controversial. It's basic human psychology that's driven entertainment since the first caveman told stories around a fire. But the entertainment industry has convinced itself that this desire for escapism is somehow wrong. Wanting entertainment instead of instruction is a massive character flaw. Audiences need to be educated out of their backward desire to simply enjoy themselves for 2 hours. The reckoning is coming though. It has to. Financial reality always wins in the end. Pixar can blame audiences for not appreciating original stories, but eventually they'll run out of money to make movies nobody watches. Disney can claim sexism killed the Marvels, but eventually they'll have to explain to shareholders why they keep making films that lose hundreds of millions. Netflix can hide behind algorithms and demographic targeting, but eventually subscriber losses will force them to make content people actually want to watch. The question is, how much damage will be done before Hollywood finally admits the obvious? Now, the solution to this is so simple, it's almost painful. Make good movies, tell compelling stories, create characters people care about, stop lecturing, stop preaching, and most importantly, stop blaming. Elio became a statement about environmental activism and gender nonconformity that test audiences found so alienating they literally refused to pay money to see it. That's the difference between art and propaganda. Until Hollywood remembers this difference, until they stop treating audiences as problems to be solved rather than customers to be served, they're gonna keep making expensive failures and keep blaming you for not appreciating it. Maybe when the money runs out and the bubble finally bursts, someone will remember why we tell stories in the first place, to connect, to share, to help each other feel less alone in a difficult world. Most importantly, to entertain. Is that really so much to ask? Apparently, in modern Hollywood, it is, and that's why they're blaming you.